Hi all and welcome to this supporter game analysis. So today's supporter is Simon van Sloterdijck. Thank you very much, Simon, for sending in your game. And he played this game with the pieces just a few days ago against Kröger. So without further ado, let's take a look. Simon was playing e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, the main line of the Caro-Kann. There is the exchange on e4, and now Ron plays the Capablanca variation with bishop f5. There is here also, for instance, the Karpov variation with knight d7, or I believe it's called the Tartakower variation with knight f6, which is also quite topical in recent years, most notably because of Magnus Carlsen, who has played it on a number of occasions. But anyway, let's stick to the game. Bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6. Now all of this is theory so far, and normally sides continue here with h4, but Simon decides to play the knight to f3 first. And you could maybe say that it is a slight inaccuracy, because the threat of knight e5 is not so serious yet. When you compare it to playing h4 first, then you're threatening to trap the bishop, and then you're supposed to play h6, and only now they play knight f3, because then the threat to the bishop would be more serious, because black would not be able to recapture with the h-pawn anymore. But with the move order reversed, we get into the same position. So back to the game, where Simon first played knight f3, and Ron decided to defend against knight e5 anyway, and now h4, h6 was played. Okay, bishop d3, I suppose, is a move that you can play. But if you want to play this opening and get the most out of it, you really want to clamp down on the light squares. So theory suggests that you should include these moves first, and then you push the bishop to h7, and only then you play bishop d3. And we can see that if we trade the bishop of the light squares, and black has already weakened himself slightly on the light squares, and white is already trying to influence those light squares, and is also basically forcing black to take on d3 here. Then white has very nice development and good influence on those light squares. And he has a bishop of the dark squares, so they sort of complement each other. This is the idea of playing the main line against this Capablanca variation. But after h6, Simon decided to play bishop d3 first, not making use of the fact that he could have inserted h4, h5. And now Ron played an amazing move. Bishop h7, a move very difficult to explain. Black decides to give up a tempo and allows white in the process to completely ruin his kingside development, and also put his rook on a very awkward square on h7. I would go so far as to say that this is basically already a losing blunder. This is probably also why Stockfish gives this move a double question mark. Now the funny thing is, Simon doesn't take the bishop on h7, and I think he should have, because opportunities are rare in a chess game, and you shouldn't blink when you have the opportunity to really hurt your opponent. Because now, of course, Ron could have played bishop d3 and fix his mistake on the earlier move. Of course, instead of castles, here bishop h7 would have been very strong. Black would have been forced to recapture with the rook. The rook is now very awkwardly placed on h7. Black will never be able to castle kingside anymore. And castling queenside does happen on occasion in these Caro-Kann main lines, but it's always scary. If you castle this way and the bishop will come out here, then you'll never feel really at ease with your king on c8. And of course, yeah, you can't really play chess if you decide to keep your king in the center of the board. So this would have been very, very strong. White would have had the luxury of just simply continuing with development, finishing his development, centralizing all his pieces, and then just look for some sort of a breakthrough, either by a pawn break or a piece sacrifice, and just play against that pawn in the center and the awkward rook on h7, etc., etc. Okay, so castles was played, and Ron again allows Simon to take on h7, which Simon again doesn't do. So this is a very peculiar phase in the game. Also because I'm pretty sure that both players understand that you should take on h7, but also that as a black player you should not allow white to take on h7. So just to retract a few moves, that's of course why theory after a move like bishop d3 simply suggests that you should immediately take that bishop. Okay, back to the game. Rook e1 was played, and now bishop d6, once again allowing the capture on h7. And now Simon finally realizes that, yeah, that must be the correct move, right? So, okay, yeah, I think that white has a tremendously strong position here. And there are several ways to go forward. And I suppose Simon makes a logical move. He plays queen d3 here, immediately hitting that target on h7 and activating his queen, putting it on a more active post. Maybe it was not the strongest move, because of course there is still quite an easy defense now, a move that black wants to play anyway, knight g to f6. But it also means that the knight on f6 is tied down for the rook on h7 for the foreseeable future. Okay, now Simon feels like a fish in the water, and he plays a very nice aggressive move, making use of the fact that black's king is still in the center, that white's rook is on e1, and that the e pawn on e6 is pinned. He now plays knight f5, and he's hitting this unprotected bishop and giving himself another target on g7. For the moment that pawn is protected by the awkwardly placed rook on h7. But okay, I think that Ron makes things worse now with bishop f8, because that's just simply undeveloping the bishop. And it makes me wonder, why don't they ever play these moves against me? It's frustrating. When I play those guys, they always play much more tenaciously. And when they play each other, okay, I shouldn't go there probably. I think that if you really want to make some sense of this position, you should play bishop c7 here. At least the bishop will stay on a somewhat more active diagonal, and the rook for the moment is still protecting g7, so that would be my suggestion. So bishop f8, and here we see one of the consequences, because now Simon takes over this diagonal where black's bishop could have been on c7. So g6, now he wants to kick out the knight, but the knight doesn't really mind. He just gives the check to the king in the center, and now black is forced to give up his dark squared bishop. And of course this dark squared bishop that remains on the board for white is a tremendously strong piece. It's in the heart of black's position. It basically prevents black from castling queenside, and it also keeps his king honest on the e7 and f8 squares. So yeah, danger is looming, danger is looming. Knight b6, that move makes sense, of course, hitting the bishop. There were many possible moves here. I think they all maintain the advantage. Probably the best, or at least the most active one, is to put the bishop on a square where it attacks something, right? Because if we attack the knight, then at least we keep the queen honest. So that would have been one way to play. But the move that Simon plays, I suppose, is also fine. Bishop g3 here, the bishop is also quite safe, because I don't think you ever need to fear the knight h5 move. You would either just drop back the bishop or go to e5, and then the knight on h5 is on the rim and looks rather silly, to be honest. So bishop g3 was played. Knight bd7 goes back. So let's see if we can try and figure out what this is all about. Maybe, yeah, I'm thinking that maybe Ron was afraid that white would now put his knight in e5, and then subsequently maybe even play this sacrifice, and then I'm pretty sure that he would gain the third pawn for the piece, and the rook would crash through on e6. That would just simply lead to a winning position. But of course black again loses a lot of time and deactivates his knight. So it makes sense to look at an alternative. One alternative could be just to try and improve the king, which is basically black's biggest problem. So a move that I could suggest is king f8, just to get off the e-file. And who knows, maybe just tuck the king in here. At least then the king would also do some defensive duties and sort of take care of himself by himself. And he's not asking his pieces to defend him. It's like the king is saying, okay, I'll just take responsibility for my bad position. I'll just try to solve the problems on my own. My pieces, they have better things to do. Okay. But anyway, knight bd7 was played, and yeah, I mean, if black is gifting so many tempi, then I think we should definitely make use of the fact that we have luxury to improve all of our pieces. Queen a3 would have been a suggestion, maybe to stop the king to go to f8, but then maybe queen e7 would have been possible, but then maybe queen b3. Anyway, rook 81 is just a fine move. It simply keeps the winning advantage. So now, still with his king in the center, black goes pawn hunting. Now that normally is not a very good idea, to go pawn hunting with your lone queen when your house is on fire. Bishop d6 would have been a try. Just saying again, no, I'm not allowing your king to escape to the king side, and of course not being afraid of this move, because then rook b1 would be tremendously strong, and after this exchange of captures it becomes completely clear that white is completely winning. He has very dominant piece activity and he doesn't mind being down a pawn. Yeah, so that would have been very strong. Simon plays it slightly more conservatively and he says, no, I'm not even giving you the pawn, I'm just playing a very cool, calm and collected b3. But of course, again, king f8 was possible now, probably the toughest defense. But Ron, yeah, didn't feel like playing that, and there is still one right to castle, yeah, and that's the right to castle to the queen side, and that normally psychologically, as probably happened in this game, convinces a player that he should make use of that right. But it's maybe a little bit from the frying pan into the fire, because the king is not so safe here. As I mentioned, it all has to do with this dark squared bishop and the fact that with a well-timed c4 and who knows d5, white can completely blow up the center and the queen side, and then of course it will tell very seriously that these pieces here on the king side are awkwardly placed. So queen e3 was played first, but I think this is also slightly reactive. Of course, Simon saw that now the rook is opposite the queen and that maybe he has to reckon with moves such as knight e5, or knight c5. But knight e5 is not a threat, right? Because knight e5 I can take with either white knight or white bishop. And let's make a nothing move. Let's say we play king h1. Knight c5 is also not a threat because I take the knight, and if you think you're smart, you take my queen. I also take your queen in the process. Now I'm also up a piece. So I don't think that after castle's queenside, white needs to move his queen. Once again, all these moves, these slightly reactive moves, they lose time. And time is of the essence in chess. I always say a kingdom for a tempo. And I think it would have made more sense if white just continues with a move like c4 here, building up his attack on the queen side. Of course, queen e3 is not a mistake, it's just a very safe move. But on the other hand, white should consider the fact that now he can be harassed by black's other knight, right? And black plays like that, and one of the consequences, and I'm not sure that Simon was completely happy with this, is that now he decides to put his queen on c1, right? So this has been a bit of an intermezzo. Not that black is seriously repairing his position, because the knight on d5 in turn is also vulnerable, and the queen is of course a very mobile piece, so it will just jump back to activity sooner or later. Now black plays rook e8, and he gives Simon a target because the rook on e8 is simply unprotected. Look at this vis-a-vis, look at this indirect activity. That means that the pawn on e6 is not a defender of the d5 square anymore, and we will see that in a few moves Simon will make very good use of that. So he plays c4, that makes a lot of sense. The knight now goes back to e7, and bravo, d5 is played here. And not only do we see that the rook is eyeing black's rook here, and the knight making black's position uncomfortable, but that funnily enough the queen also is eyeing the king. And that also means that if you, let's say you take like this, I can recapture with a check. So also here black would not have time to take on d5. Taking on d5 wouldn't even be possible. Of course black is in check now, but if you were to take here with the knight, then even a move like rook takes d5 is possible, all because of the pin over the e file. So yeah, that's why I would call rook e8. That move doesn't really make a lot of sense. It would make a lot more sense to try and stop white from playing c4 and just try and nestle the knight into this hole on c3 and resist like that for as long as possible. That would be a more active defense instead of rook e8, which is a really passive defense, putting the rook in harm's way even. So c4 was played, knight e7, d5. Yeah, that is, I would say, a decisive breakthrough, threatening to take twice on e6, for instance, among many other ideas, I'm sure. So knight f5, defending and hitting the bishop on h2. But black's problems don't go away. Simon just calmly retreats the bishop to h2. And yeah, still has all kinds of difficulties here. Rook h to h8. Finally, yes, finally now black manages to connect his rooks. I suppose he could have done that one or two moves earlier also, right? And from this moment on, white has a nice array of targets. This is a target. It's attacked twice and defended twice. This is a target because it can be attacked in one move by a piece of lesser value. So let's just see how Simon now makes use of that. He decides to go for g4, ask that knight, where are you going? Well, there are not really many safe squares for the knight. d6 is unavailable, d4 is unavailable, e3 is unavailable, g3 is unavailable, h4 is unavailable, e7 is available, but then the rook on e8 would not protect e6, so white would just simply win a pawn on e6. So that explains why Ron had to retreat the knight to g7. But now it becomes target practice. You can see that all of white's heavy pieces are on the central files. The bishop is on an excellent diagonal. The knight can jump forward in one move. He now starts to open up the position with d takes c6. I think that is good. There were probably other ways to win as well. B takes c6 is a bit of an ugly move, but at least it would not put black's queen in harm's way. So now Ron decides to give white another tempo, because now also the knight can join the fray by hitting the queen. So yeah, even more wind in white's sails, I want to say. Queen c5 was played, and here there is a slight hesitation. Knight b5 immediately is tremendously strong, of course winning the game, because there are so many threats against those dark squares with the knight on black's half of the board. But for some reason Simon decided to flick in b4. It doesn't really matter, but it's also not so clear why you would sacrifice this pawn and only then play knight b5 as happened in the game. Maybe he wanted to attack a7 at a moment that the queen is not protecting a7. Anyway, it doesn't really matter so much, because the game remains winning. So yeah, in order to stop this horrible check on d6, which is the more dangerous of the moves, knight d6 is more dangerous than knight a7, I want to say. Here Ron decided to put his king on d8. Of course this pins the knight on d7, but also the king now becomes vulnerable to a capture check, and this is the culmination basically of the whole game. It's not a very difficult exchange sacrifice, but a nice sacrifice nonetheless. Rook takes d7, really smoking out black's king here, removing one of the last defenders that the black king had around him. Because look at the position. The queen is normally only vulnerable to attacking pieces, and the other pieces are over here, not really able to help out the king in the center. But wait, Waldemar, would you really sacrifice an exchange? Are you sure that you're going about this the right way? And or that Simon is going about it the right way? And I want to say yes. Absolutely, because in these situations it's not so much about the nominal value of the pieces, but more about the number of attacking and defending units. And just repeating myself, white has 4 very active pieces in the attack against basically a lone king with a queen hovering around on b4, but the queen is only vulnerable to those attacking pieces as well. And yeah, there is really no escape. So let's see how Simon crowns the game. Rook d1 check. Of course, if the king tries to run away, then there is the simple bishop d6 winning the queen. Maybe it's objectively the best just to try and get some material back, but of course this is an irrelevant position to talk about. So we can understand that black played queen c6. Yeah. There was also here king c8, but that leads to a mate in one after knight a7 after all. That's very nice. Here we can see the activity of white's pieces, right? The rook and the bishop are guarding the emergency exits, and the knight is stabbing the knife into the heart. Okay, so king c6 was played. Practically speaking, probably the best idea. But then rook d6 came, and now the king is really completely trapped here. Queen e3 followed, king c4, and now there are several mating possibilities, and Simon chooses a very nice one here with rook a3, forcing mate or the loss of the queen, and here Ron decided to throw in the towel. Okay, well, that's it for this game. If you've come this far, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, please support me. It would be very nice to get to 1000 subscribers. And if you also want to see your game discussed in this way on YouTube, then subscribe to the channel, send me a note through the comments, for instance, and also send me a PGN file of your game. That can also be a link on Lichess, for instance, just as long as I can get to a PGN file or a PGN download of your game. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next game.